It is tax cut eve on the House side with a big vote scheduled there for tomorrow. While Republicans on the Senate side now scramble to figure out how to get Senator Ron Johnson back on board after his vow to vote no on what he's seeing so far. President Trump trying to sell it to all sides. So why is the message about letting people keep more of their own money getting lost in translation? Let's bring in syndicated radio hosts Chris Plants and Isaac Wright from Forward Solutions Strategy. Good to see both of you tonight.
Hey, Shannon. Good to be here.
So last night we had a town hall with Brett Baier and Martha McCallum and the House Speaker, who at one point the question was asked, how many of you think that your taxes are going up? And so many hands went up. I mean, this whole thing is supposed to be about tax cuts, Chris. So where is it's getting lost in translation?
Well, it is. Like, we know that the Republicans are generally speaking terrible at messaging. The Democrats tend to be very good at messaging. The Democrats have certain advantages, like the Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, NBC, working for them and carrying their message for them. So the Democrats poisoned the well on this entire discussion long before we heard anything in the way of details out of either side of Capitol Hill on what would be in the bill. It's just payoff for the rich, the middle class gets nothing, and the Democrats are out there hammering that message every day, and they have a compliant media doing their work for them. So the American people, over time, end up believing what they've heard 100 times, that they're not going to get a tax cut.
Why even bother then to go through this whole exercise? I don't understand how it gets out to the average American out there that we're doing all out to lifting and trying to get something done so we can raise your taxes. I mean, Isaac, you guys are good.
Well, I think as much as you would offer that to the credit of Democrats, I think the reality is more about calculators. And it's just the simple math of the equation, right? In the first year, 50% of the value of this tax cut is going to go to the top wealthiest 1% of Americans. In 10 years' time, that's going to shift all the way to 80%. In 10 years' time, 1 in 4 American households making less than $100,000, that's 24 million households, according to the Joint Economic Committee of the U.S. Senate, are going to see their taxes increase, not decrease. Those are the facts that are bothering people, in addition to the fact it's a job killer, right? When you lower the profits or lower the tax rate on foreign profits versus domestic profits, it incentivizes these large corporations that are already getting the bulk of the tax cuts to then move jobs overseas. This is a bad bill for Main Street.
Well, we had another expert sit here last night and tell me the exact opposite and said that when you do things like make it easier to expense and inventory capital and those kinds of things, like it actually encourages business investment. So is it semantics, Chris? Is it about, I see you nodding over there, is it about the way that you explain what it is, or can we get a factual answer? Are taxes going up on people?
Well, it's always the battle of the facts and the battle of the pseudo-facts, and we could go into all kinds of stats about how the top 10% of earners pay 70% of federal income taxes and so on. And look, the top 1% pays an extraordinarily disproportionate a portion of federal income taxes as well. So if you're cutting taxes on taxpayers, those are the people who are going to get their taxes cut. And the Democrats, like it or not, 47% of us don't pay any federal income taxes at all.
I mean, say that again, because a lot of people don't believe that number.
Right, well,
when you say that half of Americans don't pay federal income taxes.
It's a straight-up fact, and you could discuss the, break down that segment of the population for hours on end, but 47%, nearly half of us, pay no federal income taxes at all. The 53% of us that do pay federal income taxes, it's still stacked toward the people who are so-called rich. You make $110,000 a year, you're in the top 10% of earners. The top 10%, again, pays 70% of income tax. So if you're going to cut taxes on people, then look, and look, if the Republicans don't produce, you got to understand also the Democrats said we could never achieve 3% economic growth, and it took President Trump until his second quarter in office before we hit 3% economic growth. So you can't believe what the Democrats are saying.
One of the things I want to talk about too is this idea. The Senate version includes repealing the individual mandate under Obamacare. Some people say it's a big gamble if they leave it in. They got to go to conference if they pass these things and all that kind of stuff too. Could be a 2 for Republicans because they didn't get it done. It also could blow up the whole thing. Where do you think that goes? Do you think it's a smart idea or a bad idea?
I think it's a test of the character of our nation. We're talking about cutting programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now throwing 13 million Americans, working Americans, off their health care through the ACA.
If the mandate goes away and people don't have to, if they're not forced to eat broccoli, a lot of people just won't eat broccoli.
Right. Well, according to all the estimates that are out there, nobody's disputed it's going to cost 13 million people their health care over the next 10 years if they do away with the mandate. It is one more sabotage to the marketplaces. So in the end, it's going to be a test of the character of our nation and our priorities.
Well,
do we care about education? Do we care about sick people, old people, the widow and the orphan, as some of us would say? And that's going to be a test of what we have to face. Or do we care about the wealthiest 1%? For that matter, are we going to borrow $1.5 trillion against future generations by blowing up the deficit to pay for tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% now? My colleague talks about the wealthiest 10%. Let's talk about the wealthiest 1% that in 10 years would be getting 80% of this value of this tax cut. Democrats are for tax cuts. We've said we are for tax cuts. We want to see tax cuts that benefit the middle class, the 99%, not the 1%, and don't add to the deficit.
All right, wait, I know there's much more to say. And we could sell tickets to this conversation continuing. We're out of time, but I think that it's important for us to ask the question, too, why both sides of the aisle are more interested in cutting the deficit.
Well,
and spending all kinds of money, and that goes across party lines.
We just added $9 trillion to the debt under Barack Obama in 8 years, and now they're panicking about $1.5 trillion. That's
the last time we had a balanced budget was under a Democrat. You're welcome to come join the table. We'll bring calculators.
Oh boy! All right, we're getting out our calculators, our slide rules, all of it. It's coming up next. By the way, thank you, gentlemen. It's been weeks.